right, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today I have quite a special guest here with me, somebody with whom I wanted to talk for quite some time now. So I'll welcome to the podcast Brandon Martin. Brandon Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Francisco. I've been looking forward to getting on here and discussing, deep topics with you for a long time. I know that you've been talking to Douglas Martin quite a bit, and he talks very highly of your show, and I've watched a few of your shows, and, they're all really on point. So it's really awesome to be here with you. It's quite an honor.
Oh, I appreciate it, and thank you very much for your words. So today we are covering a subject that I think it's very important and not very talked about, not discussed very much in this sort of these two environments, so to speak, that we're gonna talk about. And pretty much we're gonna discuss anarchism and its pretty much its relation to occulted knowledge, esoteric knowledge, and the mystery traditions. And yeah, so it's kind of a big subject. I guess we'll try to do our best with the time that we have at our disposal today. But I think we can start to tackle this topic. And I already did a few episodes on anarchy and on its true meaning. So basically, it's a condition where there are rules. However, there are not rulers, people who arbitrarily govern and impose their will on everybody's life. And the occult, we talk about that quite a bit on my program. The occult is simply hidden knowledge, knowledge that was hidden for a reason, whether it being a good reason or a bad reason, to sort of either to safeguard safeguard important topics that were at risk of being lost or compromised. As we'll see, great part of that knowledge was actually compromised, but it was also saved by that hid that knowledge, and for that reason it was brought forward into the future, into our days and our current historical period. And so however we see what we see, it's sort of a schism between these two aspects, between anarchism and knowledge of the mystery traditions and esotericism. Brandon, if you want to start addressing this this topic a little bit.
The first thing I'd like to start out with is, my background was raised on anarchist philosophy. I was raised by a slightly libertarian father, and he definitely, had books like Manly P. Hall, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, in his library. He had, the Communist Manifesto. He had Josiah Warren, who's an anarchist. He had Lysander Spooner, who's also an anarchist. So he kind of had a mix between, occultism and anarchism. So I got initiated early on just by having access to that knowledge. But one thing I did notice by reading those books early on, let's start with the anarchist philosophies and the anarchist literature. Let's say like Lysander Spooner, who was a lawyer. He fought to become a lawyer. If you read his books, you really recognize that he does not have any writings, at least to the best of my knowledge, about any occultism or any mystery schools or anything like that. It tends to dabble mostly in the, the foundations of freedom, maybe economic freedom or the absence of slavery. He was a abolitionist in many ways, and and he brings in great knowledge, and he talks about natural law. He happened to be an atheist, though, so I do disagree with him on his atheist points of view. But that's here or there, for how people approach it. I think atheism is another religion that holds us back, absolutely. But, it's the same thing with Josiah Warren and Emma Goldman and, all these anarchist authors. And that's one thing I'd like to say, is that most people who look into anarchy, they never actually study the authors. And I think it's really important. I think literature is extremely important, because that's the way you're going to understand the ideas. So most of the people that I consider to be fake anarchists in the communities, whenever I talk to them, and this is one reason why I consider them to be fake, is because they never take an initiation into educating themselves, and they never look at the actual source material. And that goes for the occult as well. That's one of the biggest things that we do not see in these communities, because they seemingly tend to be opposing each other at some level, right? And that's one of the issues. We need to synthesize both of these, because they're fundamental to human freedom. I personally don't think you can really have freedom without understanding the mystery schools, because the mystery schools are a spiritual prospect. And I think that's why, like I said earlier, Lysander Spooner never got into it, because it's about spirituality in many levels, and about, the self, the higher self. To be initiated into any of the occult traditions, you had to believe in a higher power. So it makes sense why he would not have, wrote anything in his literature about that, because he happened to not believe in a higher power. So, if you're going to be initiated, you're going to have to at least at some level has some semblance of a creative force in nature. And that's part of occultism. It's a hidden force, that that we cannot see, that we only, experience the effects of. So one way of saying it is, nature is visible spirit and spirit is invisible nature. So a lot of people look at it that way. But going back to my original point, it's really hard to bridge those in people's minds, because the anarchist group think that, occultism is a cult. They think that it's all negative and it's all evil. And the only things that they do dabble in, if they dabble in any kind of occultism, is, 18th century to 19th century, like Wicca magic and Crowleyanism, Aleister Crowley stuff. And I'm not talking about Thelema. I'm talking about just being obsessed with Crowley himself. And that's because of the mindsets that come out of that. At least that's my personal experience within the anarchist groups that I've been around. You see a lot of females definitely getting into the Wicca, like magic stuff, which has roots in mystery schools and paganism and stuff like this, but it's been corrupted, and it actually was, compromised early on. And if you look into the origins of the Wicca movement, it definitely has some sketchy foundations, that's for sure. But that's one thing, that's one thing that you kind of mentioned earlier with your intro, is that even though these things have been compromised, it's because of the charlatans at some level that we've kept the knowledge around. So it's really, it's kind of intriguing to think about it that way, because, if it wasn't for the charlatan tarot readers and astrologists and stuff like that, some of this knowledge may have been completely done away with, and what I mean by that is, it was because they were standing against the papacy at some level and making money, even though it wasn't based upon pure forms or pure esotericism. It still held intact the esoteric symbols, which can trace back our origins. So it's just it's a big topic. This is going to be a fun topic to get into today. So I'm really happy to be here to talk about this, because nobody else talks about this stuff. Nobody wants to say, hey, if you want freedom, you have to understand the occult. Nobody wants to talk about that at all. It's always economic, you know?
Yeah, that's right. What I wanted, that's kind of one thing I wanted to say. You know, anarchists tend to be very, some people would say left-brained, so tend to steer more toward sort of a, I guess, pragmatic, practical worldview, which is good in a way, but it's not so good when it rejects, when it completely rejects the other, the other part, which is sort of a higher order thinking, a more holistic type of thinking that actually will help you understand, deeper truths. And they kind of consider it, sort of voodoo nonsense. If you think about, probably most anarchists are kind of, what we'd call, social anarchists, or sort of, anarcho-socialist, anarcho-communist, and even if they don't recognize themselves, they don't, identify themselves as part of those camps. They still have this extremely one-sided mentality. So that's probably most anarchists. Again, there are exceptions, like these spiritualist groups that consider themselves anarchists also, and they are on the opposite side, they have the opposite type of imbalance. But I think it's kind of the minority in the anarchist community. Probably the majority is like left brain oriented and very economically oriented, as you said. As you were saying, you have all these camps. In fact, the anarcho-capitalists, and most of it probably some sort of leftist, quote unquote, anarchism. So it's very difficult, and they really tend to reject deeper truths about natural law and morality, even though those are kind of those are accepted a little bit more, maybe in some minority groups, I guess. However, as you were saying, knowledge that goes even beyond that, like origins, occult, and mystery traditions, that's probably the thing that, I guess, triggers the more negative reactions in anarchists.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, I think you nailed it. Yeah, I think that the left brain anarchist, which I have a lot of experience with, one of my good friends is actually a very, very intellectual anarchist. And when I met him, he was turning me on to stuff that I had never thought of. So it's good to have them around sometimes because they can challenge you. But at the same time, when I started talking to him, he had no symbolic literacy. He had no idea about the more ancient alternative origins of our species. And he just looked at anything that was occult and esoteric as some type of, especially the secret societies, right, as some type of fraternal brotherhood that was just like guys getting together, drinking, having a good time, and yeah, maybe passing some secrets along every once in a while. But he doesn't realize that within the proper uses of these secret societies, which I believe you and Doug have talked about a little bit, is that, they were preserving philosophy, philosophy that was important for not only were they preserving the mysteries of the self and the universe, but they were preserving philosophy that was important to freedom. And they were passing down ideas that were contrary to the ruling class, to the elite class throughout their time periods, whether it's the papacy, which tends to be one of the main things that they were, hiding away from, or whether it was monarchy at that time period, which tend to overlap, obviously, at many levels, or whether it was just some form of oligarchy, any of these things, right? Any type of ruling class. And that's why people that can combine anarchism and the occult, I would consider to be the most sophisticated of the freedom fighters, because they've balanced the two aspects of knowledge that is required to meet the law of manifestation in nature. You know, not only are you getting the moral aspects, but you're getting the higher, what some may call the higher mysteries. And in the past, with like Albert Churchward and some other great authors, they call them the lesser mysteries. It just depends on the orientation, how you look at those things, right? So Doug talks about that. He'll call them the lesser mysteries. I call them the higher because they're the more important ones. But you know, it's just a semantical issue, you can say. But I think it's really important that anarchists start to, you know, really take interest in the occult at a fundamental level and understand that it's the learned men that have always been attacked, right? It's always the learned men who are, you know, the target of the elites or the ruling class or the authorities. And that's why, you know, we have these contingencies set up in the past, such as different types of secret societies, because they were learned people, and the knowledge that they held was a danger to their, you know, their propaganda, to their control system, obviously. So it's really important to understand that. That's why I always point this out, like the anarchy that a lot of people think of it as, like economic anarchy, like you're talking about capitalistic, socialistic, or communistic anarchy, is still wrapped up in, you know, this weird authoritarian idea. And, you know, I understand why people come from those positions to a certain extent, because, you know, I see the green anarchists and they're saying, you know, we have to solve the food problems. And I just turn around and I always ask them, for example, like, do you think like if everybody grew their own food that somehow slavery is going to go away? You know, no, it's not. You know, you can still live in a system of slavery if everybody's growing their own food. I'm not saying don't grow your own food, but I'm also saying that we shouldn't go to primitivism either. Because a lot of people think anarchism means primitivism. There's the primitist, you know, like, hey, let's go back to just living in caves and, you know, yes. And it's like, no.
I've seen that when I was looking for anarchist ideas here in Italy, and I was looking up the internet and etc. So yeah, I stumbled across these activists who were anarcho-primitivists. So
right.
Funny.
Yeah, it's very funny. You know, the mystery schools are passed down in the ancient Native American cultures and stuff like that. That's the important part. But we have to never neglect the implements that we've evolved with. I think one of the issues here is people fear technology, and that's always been a psychological issue throughout history. Any type of new technology came up, people had to challenge their own self-worth in society. Because we all want to, like, especially men are active beings, you know, they have an active principle. They want to be out creating things, you know, they want to be moving. They want to be engaged in some sort of growth for their society, you know, at least generally speaking. It tends to be like a biological, you know, phenomenon that we have, that we want to be the, you know, the pushers to push society forward at some level. And females do that too. I'm not saying they don't, but it, you know, throughout history, that tends to be a man aspect. This is why most of the creative, you know, endeavors have always been done by men, such as the greatest monuments have usually been built by men throughout history. It doesn't mean females didn't have their role in that, because they definitely did, and they had a great role in it. But yeah, one thing is that whenever there's a new technology that makes your labor become less valuable in society, then you have to challenge yourself to like make yourself more valuable to the, whether it's the tribe or the society itself, right? So whenever new technology comes out, it's almost an ontological issue where like we have to self-reflect and say, now what can I contribute? You know, like now what can I do? Whereas before my contribution was, let's say, let's just take the automated systems, and I'm not necessarily for all automation, but let's say you are a person who was working in a service where there was no automation, and then you're doing this process, and then they brought out automation, and your service is no longer required because now they have these machines to do it, right? Well, there's a good thing and a bad thing to that. Obviously, it's very challenging for an individual, but also the other thing is that it gives you more opportunity, because now you have to increase your skill set, your creativity, and you have to find what other things can you contribute to the world as the world progresses. Because technology implements, right, the things that we're making, that's never going to stop. We're always going to be creative beings. We're always going to be building with our ingenuity and creating new things, and it's how. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that problem is especially, I mean, that is a problem in how today's society is structured with I mean, if automation comes up and you say, okay, supposedly it makes work lighter, or or you don't need to to work as much, so that should be a good thing. But however, in today's society, people find themselves in the middle of the street, or
right.
or
That
whatever.
tends to
so
be.
It depends on. I mean, if we truly were living in an enlightened society, it would be a good thing to have good technologies that would make work lighter, and maybe you don't need to work as much, and you have more time, and etc. So and you are more free, actually.
Yeah.
Like
So
in today's society, it's kind of instead it's a problem, because people are out of a job, and get
right.
money,
Yeah.
and it's a problem to survive. So that's a problem
Right.
with the system, with how it's currently.
That's right.
With the current system that we are living under. So
You nailed it. So that is the problem. The problem is the way the system is structured to not incentivize freedom, because freedom is what's going to bring about, more ingenuity. It's going to bring about new advancements and growth and evolution for our species, obviously. We need sanctity. We need sanctuary, right? We need sanctuary for our minds to develop. We need sanctuary for the neocortex to activate in a higher level. We
can't evolve in a fight or flight mode, which
right.
The one
absolutely.
We are currently. They are currently pushing that type of mindset so that we don't evolve, mentally and spiritually.
That's right. They keep us in fear-based consciousness constantly. So we're always fighting or flighting. We're always fleeing, or getting confrontational with everything, right? And that's the thing with anarchism, circling this back around to our original, topic, is that that's one thing that they try to point out about anarchism, is that it's chaos, right? So the occultists on the other side, which you had, mentioned, is that they think of it as chaos, or, they think of it as some form of terrorism or something to be, shunned away from. And they think of it as immature, right? An anarchist is immature. They have no spiritual, uplift. And it's not that they're wrong. It's not that both of these sides are wrong in some levels, because, guess what? There are dark occultists, and guess what? There are anarchists that only believe in chaos. I call them the fake ones, obviously, but that's what they believe. That's what I've ran into. They think society should be burnt to the ground, and that's how you're going to solve the problems of the world,
Because there, as you said, there was also the other side that I wanted to discuss, sort of to try to bridge the gap between the concept of anarchism and the concept of esoteric knowledge and occulted knowledge. We have to talk about the other side too. So as you were saying, occultists generally, they have the mainstream view of the societally accepted view of anarchy. And as you were saying, chaos, terrorism especially, and societal collapse, like total societal annihilation, I guess.
Right.
Complete fall of society.
Yeah. I know anarchists that actually do just want the world to burn, and they just want the apocalypse, right? And I'm not talking about the actual definition for apocalypse, which means the removing of the veil, but I mean, an Armageddon almost, right? They just want everything to be leveled and then to start anew, right? And I think that's a really immature way of approaching any of the problems that we have. And then the other thing I was just thinking of is that, it seems that they would relate with each other more, the anarchists and the occultists, because they're both warred against, they're both attacked by all the mainstream, propaganda, right? They're both
there's
in a
the
way
chaotic,
right,
the
right,
terrorist and the satanic child
right,
sacrificing
right.
monster that that is dedicating himself to all sort of weird rituals. So
Yeah, it's like you think these guys would be like, oh wait, we're brothers in this, like we got something in common here. We're both being attacked, so we both have something valuable here, about what we're talking about. So I think that's something maybe the anarchists and the occultists should really look into. See, the thing is, another thing about anarchy is that we have to understand its origins, right? Coming out of the Grecian time period, and it's an idealistic one. And the reason why it was so powerful was because you have all these great philosophers of that time, right? And they were trying to deal with these concepts, quote unquote great philosophers. I mean, they obviously brought a lot of knowledge to the table, but obviously in our studies and in my studies personally, we see that some of those things were the failures that are leading us to the current condition, that have led us to the current condition that we're in today. The failures of understanding the mystery schools, the failures of understanding the origins and where they had, co-opted at least a fragment of the ancient Egyptian sciences, and then they did not understand the Egyptian sign language, and they did not understand, the more ancient, stellar mythos and things like this, which I think is really important to understand when it comes to Egyptology. But it's a fundamental issue within the idea of anarchy too. I'm not trying to talk out against anarchy. I'm just saying that that it has a connection to a certain specific time period where it arose in. And that's why I'm not attached to the word anarchy. See, when we use it here, I understand we're talking about freedom, the absence of rulers, the absence of slavery, which is the etymological definition of it. But also we have to understand like how it's been used, why it's been used that way, how it's been co-opted into a political agenda in many ways, and how we can resist that. Because we got to take these terms back. We got to take everything back. I don't attach myself to the term. I can say I'm a sovereign. I'm a freedom fighter. I'm for freedom. I can use different terms for the same thing, right? There's many different terms for that. And the reason why I hammer on anarchism so much is because obviously it's so critical to understand that that it's not what people think it is, obviously, right? So a lot of people think it's something that it's not, being like what we were just talking about. It's chaos, it's terrorism. But we've also been complicit in that. We have to realize that at some level, the people who claim to be anarchists have been complicit in making anarchists exactly what the ruling class wants it to be, so they can point at it and be like, oh, it's just about burning cars, and it's just about being hedonistic, right? Just being a complete, trash, low life person in society that has nothing to contribute to society. But if you look at it, you find that some of the most well-educated men in the mid 18th century to the 19th century were all anarchists.
Yeah. Even there's even a few Italians were individualist anarchists, like Enrico Malatesta. I think it was the most famous. But yeah, all over Europe and the States and Russia. Russia had quite a few quite a few anarchists that kind of understood, what the concept really was, what anarchy really was.
Right.
And I think
we find go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, I wanted to say something. I think it's important to consider when we see. I think the system back at the time, had to take measures against the anarchist thought spreading. So that's why you see, especially in the 1800s, the second half of the 1800s, nearly up to the early 1900s, I think it was the French government that started to associate associate anarchists with the terrorism and and terrorist attacks. So that's why you see, for example, many occultists, many teachers of esoteric knowledge of the time referring to anarchy as considering anarchy a danger to humanity. Actually, like I think about Churchward that he was saying that we were facing with the problems that we were facing were socialism and anarchy. So, and that's interesting because if you look at it in the context of his period, there was the time when there was the PSYOP was going on. European governments were, French, Italian, and even the British were saying that anarchists were actually people who put dynamite in places and and make things blow up, or they were shooting at heads of state and kings and things of the sort. So if you look at that context, you understand why these extremely intelligent and extremely valuable people were in fear of anarchy. And I think even after, I think from that point on, it was kind of a slippery slope, and I think probably the final nail in the coffin was probably the Spanish Civil War, where you had like the anarchist factions that were fighting with the Spanish Republic, that were actually a bunch of communists. So that's when they were, I guess finally associated with communism, basically, and with killing priests and doing all violent stuff and basically being just basically being Soviet type or similar kind of communists. So I think that there is this aspect to consider historically.
Right. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people do understand the history of anarchism. Like Josiah Warren here in America, he had started an anarchist commune for a while, which is not communist, but just a miniature society that was trying to get away from the tyranny at that time period. And they had very minimum crimes, and anytime they did have crime, they would have the entire city get together and they would sort out the issue. But it was I think they said it was like 3 or 4 times they actually had to get the entire city together. So they were all living in harmony with natural law and natural principles. So I think that's another thing that a lot of people bring up is like, well, what do we do with criminals in a state of anarchy? And you brought up that's what was crucial when you brought up earlier, that it doesn't mean without rules. There are rules, they're the natural laws, but also we have to understand, like, if there's a serial killer running around, we have to have a due process for that at some level. And people confuse due process or organization with government. People confuse people organizing together voluntarily with a government that's coercive and forcing you at the barrel of a gun to do these things, especially creating arbitrary laws that are victimless, where there are no victims in these scenarios, such as, like a speeding ticket or a parking ticket, something stupid like this, or, obviously avoiding taxation, right? Like, there's no victim in that. You're the victim in that. They're trying to coerce you into giving over your labor to the state and to other people, where you've not voluntarily consented to any of that. And even if you did say, okay, well, I'll do this, you still don't get the say so in what the percentage is. They dictate the percentage that they get over, that you have to give over from your product of labor. So it's a horrible way of living, obviously, is to live in that kind of system. And well, I always say this, even if anarchism did mean chaos in the way people think, like thugs running around, it's far more preferable than the entire system, being the thugs that run everything, like it's way more preferable. I think Lysander Spooner said something very similar to that. But yeah, it's far more preferable than an entire system based upon moral relativism, where the quote unquote mafia, is completely destroying and has complete control over everything, and everybody just accepts it, passively, just docile.
Yeah.
They're just like, okay, we'll just go along with this. I'd rather deal with like little factions of thugs running around stealing stuff in the city than have to live within a giant, overarching structure that is based upon that, where it's accepted. So like, most people understand if there's a thug in your street that is stealing from people on that street, they understand that's not a good thing. But when it comes to government doing it to you, it's all accepted because, you don't see it firsthand. It's not like they're just coming into your house most of the time. They do come into your house sometimes, obviously, but it's not like they're just breaking in your door every time they steal from you. They get you through this artificial consent to comply with these systems, right? And that's why I'm not for a constitutional republic either, because I'm not for these supposed legal bindings on progeny, right? Like that's what Lysander Spooner also talked about, which is like the Constitution is non-binding upon progeny. And what that means is that, yeah, maybe a group of people can get together and voluntarily create a system, but it doesn't apply to the progeny, the children, is what I mean, because they did not consent to that. And then if you have that multi-generationally, right, where you grow up in that system and then you don't really make a reasonable, consentful contract with that system because you've been conditioned to do that. It's not based on reason and intelligence. You're just doing it because that's what you were raised to believe that is correct to do. And you do that multi-generationally, then the consent is illegitimate at that point.
Yeah, and we have to remember also that, constitutions and this sort of, charts and documents, they usually all authorize and justify slavery. For example, the constitutions, they authorize taxation,
right?
Slavery and oppression and extortion, and it's immoral. So, and just we also have to consider that not only the U.S. has a constitution, but you have to consider that the major dictatorships and the most brutal dictatorships have actually constitutions.
Right,
The Soviet Union had a constitution where I actually have a copy of it, and it's real funny because it's if you read it, it's like it says that it's a union of like basically independent republics with sovereign people and the rights. It has many ethnicities inside it, and everybody is sovereign and respected, and the people have the right to this and that, and even to even to basically complain about the government if they have like a grievance or whatever. I know China has something similar. North Korea has a constitution that basically says the same things, that the people is sovereign, and it has all sorts of rights, even towards the government, which is so you can see it's kind of it's a facade, and like it's
it's there to make us feel better, right? It's there to make us comfortable within our servitude, and we're like, oh yeah, don't worry, the piece of paper with all the writings and words on it, that protects us, we'll be just fine. But obviously that's not the case, and we see that throughout history. And like you're saying, there's constitutions all over the place, and every single place you see these things, there's slavery,
And to get it back to occultism and occultists, especially, another thing I'm seeing is that they sort of have this idea that, and I can understand it, even based on the historical period, on the historical context in which some of those people were living in. For example, I think about Dante here. Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy, and he was for he was against the the temporal power of the church, and he was hoping. I mean, his hope was that a prince will rise to power, and that he was an initiate, and will set things right. Divide the spiritual realm from the political realm, and rule in a just manner. And I see this even today on some people that study occultism. They sort of have the same idea, because they obviously they think if the masses were to rule, which they associate anarchy with it. And I would say that's more of like democracy and mob rule, which is a different thing for me. But yeah, but they and in a way they're right. Yeah, if the masses were to take power, they'll basically make society collapse, as we were saying. So they are for they sort of have this hope and this dream, which for me is a bit utopistic. It's a bit utopian. Of the just the just king and the just ruler, that it's perfectly or it's an initiate, and he knows he has knowledge of the mysteries, and he will rule with a sort of rule in a just manner. We will set things right in the world, for the best of his abilities. And I really can't agree with that.
Right. Yeah, I can't agree with that either. It's the same fundamental issues that that Plato and Aristotle had, which was like they had a system called a epistocratic distortion, which is that they sorted things based off knowledge, your skills and knowledge, but it was random. So let's say they took a hat and they put all your names in there, and all the names that went into this hat for political services and representatives and things like that. Those names were the most qualified people to be in those positions, and then they just randomly pulled out, the name, and whoever it was would get that position, right? So episteme means knowledge, so it's based on knowledge, and distortion means to sort and to randomize and to to have a system of organization based off that. So and it's kind of the same thing. They were hoping for what you're talking about, the wise person to rise up and rule. The wisest people should be in the position of kingship or in rulership, right? And it's like, well, there's a fundamental paradox in that, and that is that the most wise people never want to rule other people. The most moral people never want to be in those positions of a slave master. So they're not ever going to put themselves, let's say, into that pool of that hat, that distortion, So, I've always ran into that issue with people, and they're like, oh, we just need, smarter politicians. We just need wiser, leaders. And it's like, no. That's, you don't understand. They're antithetical to each other. They do not work together. Wise people will not be in that. Don't confuse intellect with wisdom. That's another thing. They think if you're intellectually smart, then you're wise. And it's like, no. These people have not
to say that, we shouldn't, that, we are all, equal in our mental capacities and wisdom, because that's clearly not the case. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't recognize the wisdom, the better wisdom, or more wisdom in others that could even, be, guides or something similar.
Right.
However, I mean, I will always have an issue with the concept of government, whether it's wiser people wielding it or unwise and and bad and evil people wielding it, because it's the concept of people having more rights than the subject class, the slave class, basically. So that's really my issue with that sort of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe in obviously a cooperative hierarchy, right? Because of that knowledge difference, right? some people are more knowledgeable in certain areas than I am, and I'm going to have to go to them for that knowledge at some level. And I may be more knowledgeable at something else, but depending, not everybody can learn every skill. Obviously, it's like the Knights of the Round Table, right? You're gonna bring your own skill to the table, and you're gonna unify, and every person there in that round table contributes to that society, to that goal, right? And you all have something different to bring to that goal. So I think that's very important to recognize, that we're not saying that
we're not
that there
saying
aren't differences.
Communistic, equality.
Yeah.
We have equality in rights.
Yes.
Rights are equal for everyone. We don't have equality in we don't have this flattened everybody, like where everybody's it's completely the same. So
right. Yeah, over here we call it, I'm not sure about where you're at, but we call it equality of outcome, where we're like forcing everybody to be on that same level playing field through the barrel of a gun, like everybody gets the same outcome no matter what. Everybody gets this, everybody gets the exact same house, the exact same treatment all across the board. And it's like, no. We want equality in rights. That's it. Equality of opportunity and equality in rights. That's all we need, because no matter what, we need differences. We need that fluctuation. We all need to have color in our own lives. We need to have different experiences. We don't want the exact same thing. I don't want the same thing that my neighbor has, In some areas I do. I want a house, but I don't want my house to be identical to his. I don't want to be just robots copying, just be the exact same thing. Imagine if all art was all the same picture. That's like equality of outcome. It's all the same. It's like there's no creativity there. There's no uniqueness. It's all the same. It's all copies of each other. That's how order followers are, right? They're all the same. They're just copy of one another. They look all the same. They act the same. It's like, it's ridiculous. But taking it back to the occultism there, it's something that the occultists do talk about a lot, which is they don't speak about it in the idea of rights. They do speak about it in liberty a lot, which I think is really important to understand. But they're always taking it back to a spiritual aspect, right, of self-knowledge. And that's why it's so important, not only self-knowledge, but knowledge of the realm we exist in as well, and knowledge of the elemental powers and knowledge of the phenomenons of nature, right? And I think that's one of the most important things. When we say living in harmony with natural law, well, that's the first step. There's so much more to discover beyond that. Nature is so eclectic and so vast. There's so many things. I've heard this before, where people are like, "Oh, you just created a plateau for you to never grow beyond if you understand this knowledge of natural law. Like it's the pinnacle of all things, of all evolution." And it's like, no. That's actually where we're starting at. That's where we need to start to jump. It's our jumping point. It's where that's the floor that we need to have, our foundation, and then we grow from there, and that's really important. Yeah.
There are radio or video podcasts that you probably would want to listen to. They have like 200 plus episodes, and then there's all the the documentation and the research on those 200 plus episodes, for example. So
right.
you're not finished. So
yeah, no, not at all. You're definitely not finished. You need comparative research, and that's something that instant gratification has harmed us with. Is that we at the touch of a button, we just like small snippets because our attention span is so small. So like I know a lot of people that have studied a little bit of the occult, but they never actually go and read books. Like I look at the background of you got books everywhere. I got books behind this sheet here.
I read them all, but
yeah. Well, me too. It's like, but you have them at your access, and it's so important. People do not read anymore. If they do read, it's just online. They read text online, articles online, and stuff, and that's a good start. But you need physical copies. I think you need physical books. There's a reason why they're making books obsolete. It's easier for them to convert them to tarnish the original teachings that are in the books, to censor them, to pervert them at some level. So I get copies of books from different publishers, and they're esoteric books and occult books, and they're reprints, right? And then I look at them and I'm like, and then I look at the original, like on the PDF or whatever, or if I have an original copy, and I'm like, there's something different here. And then I start to compare them, and I notice, oh, there's like chapters missing, or there's words that are completely changed, or, it's not identical to the original print. And obviously it's not identical to the original intent of the writer and the author then, because you're converting that. And they do that purposely on a lot of books. Another thing, just to add to that, is nobody reads the dark occult books. They never read the elite books, the ones that are coming from, the people, and they publish them all the time. They put them out there. They know you're not going to read them, and that's why it's fine. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to put out this book about slavery and how we're doing it, and we're going to put it right in their face, and nobody's going to read it. And it's so true. Nobody touches them, at all.
yeah. And even with what's going on now, pretty much where the agenda has been laid out in books, and people just not only when they read it, but even if you show them, they're like, well, yeah, that's this rich people who are bored, and they write these books with their idea, and they have all their ideas, their theories, but ultimately they don't have any influence, right?
Right. Right. The anarchists, they have this superstitious belief about occultism, right? Even if they do get interested in occultism, they still look at it as some type of fantasy or, fairy tale, voodoo, like kind of like what you were talking about. And they stigmatize it, right? And that's one of the worst things that we can do, is marginalize and stigmatize or bastardize the occult, right? Like, we see that all over the board, especially in the conspiratorial movements, right? We see that in conspiracies, it's always an attack towards the mystery traditions. I guess there's a mass majority of it that's about attacking the government, but then it gets wrapped up in the secret societies, and those secret societies are wrapped up in the occult traditions, and then everybody demonizes the occult traditions, and all it does is it pushes people back into the hands of the papacy, of the church, of the Roman church,
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's one thing that we do see, is that it's always an effort to attack the learned men, and it's always an effort to marginalize the occult traditions as something evil and as something either fantasy-based, paranormal, superstitious, and the church does this very, very well, But it's really crazy, because the church actually has a lot of esoteric knowledge in their text. There's a lot of esoteric knowledge. It's been converted, it's been corrupted and perverted in many levels, and overlapped, and used to warp the minds of people, obviously, rather than freeing the minds of people. But there's a lot of really important esoteric knowledge within many documents coming from the church, and a lot of the manuscripts, you're going to find cosmology, astrotheology, you're going to find deep occult mysteries, you're going to find connections to all the mystery schools and traditions like tarot, Kabbalah, Freemasonry, especially Freemasonry. See, to me, Freemasonry is pretty much the root of all the mystery traditions. It's not originally called Freemasonry. There was no name for it. It was just an expression of certain spiritual aspects. It was just a practice. It was a spiritual practice where we had rites and rituals, and that's where the Freemasonry and the lodge system got all this, was from totemic hero cults. And that's really important to understand, of the evolution of the totemic societies. And a lot of people don't ever study totemism. You hear about people studying tribalism and stuff like that, but whenever I speak of totemic sociology, people glaze over. I'm like, oh, there's the problem. You never studied any anthropology, and to me, esoteric anthropology is very advanced. So I can understand why a lot of people shy away from it. I mean, I am no expert on it either, and I've been studying it for probably 7 years now, and it's still mind-boggling to get into. But it is where the path takes you. You have to go down that path to understand it. And one reason why, this isn't the primary reason why, obviously, but this is a good point to bring up here since we're talking about anarchism, is that the totemic societies were stateless societies. They were anarchistic in many ways, and they had a very healthy, robust structure of how to live in harmony with natural law and how to preserve and create contingencies for the decline of consciousness and the decline into tyranny and authoritarian belief systems and the decline of the esoteric mythos, right? The esoteric mysteries that they were preserving in the mythology. So I think that's really important to understand. And it gets really advanced because most people, when you think of the occult, most people think of like maybe the Middle Ages forward, Most people like, that's where, at least for me, when I talk to most people, they're thinking Middle Ages and forward when we're talking about occultists and occultism. And it's like, man, it's been around way longer than that. It's been with us since time immemorial, since humans could first self-recognize, since they can become self-conscious of who they are and their own thoughts. And of course, we didn't have expressions for that. We didn't have words for it. And we had to develop through long time periods how to communicate these ideas. So it's a vast topic. So I'm not trying to make the bar so high that people aren't, that they feel like, oh, this is just impossible to understand either. I don't want to make it seem like that, because when you get into it, you can understand it. You can get a grip over it. It just takes some work. They call it the great work for a reason, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, but again, it's the common misconceptions in society about occult and what it really is, and also, even when you start talking about rituals, ritual is another term that it's so difficult to understand for people, because it's kind of associated with either something religious or something I guess more nefarious. So
very satanic. They think of it as Satanism,
Yes.
You're out in the woods with your friends sacrificing animals.
Yeah, or worse.
Or worse, yeah.
And one thing I'd say is that people need to keep in mind that rituals were instituted to brought knowledge forward, for remembrance,
Right.
So that they were very important, actually.
Right. I used to practice a lot of thelemic rituals for a while because I like thelema. I think it's it's profoundly powerful. That doesn't mean I support Crawley, but I think what he put together there was an amalgamation, a tapestry that was, one of the most pure forms of the esoteric traditions that he had at his fingertips. He took all these traditions and put them together. And it really was about true individuality, sovereignty, freedom, and the higher case L, love, the agape, right? Agape. So it's very important to understand what all that means. And a higher case W, will, because a lot of people don't distinguish lowercase will from higher case will, and they don't understand that it's about a process greater than just yourself. It's about a cooperative effort with creation. It's about a cooperative effort to bring about harmonious living and development and growth and evolution is the word I'm looking for the society and the environment where you're living in. Because we're stewarders here, right? We are here. We have the ability to do so much in this world, and the occult knowledge gives us the insight to be able to utilize things in nature to make nature actually prosper, in a more efficient way. We have to be here not only to steward it, but we also have the ability to organize, let's say like a garden, where nature can grow in such an efficient fashion. That doesn't mean turn the whole world into a garden. It just means that we have the ability to do things with nature where other creatures on this planet do not. And that's because of our higher level thinking. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to breed into higher types. We're trying to evolve into higher types.
Yeah.
So we have to understand in history what allowed us to evolve into a higher type, where the evolution took place and why the evolution was taking place. And it's usually, like we talked about earlier, in a sanctuary, and also it's usually in the study of the occult traditions, the occult mysteries, the esoteric mysteries of nature.
Yeah, that's right. And something came to mind when you were talking about the fact that we as a sort of as a higher species on higher type species on this planet, we have the ability also to make things and modify to a certain extent our environment. Hopefully in balance. That's what we should do, and we are not doing, but that's what we should do, and we would have the capacity to do, I think. So it's we were talking about primitivism in the beginning, and it's kind of sort of that again, it's a matter of balance, something that the Egyptian civilization understood pretty well, I'd say.
Yes, right.
And something came to mind about that, and it's from Final Fantasy VII, the video game, and it's when they go to you probably remember when they go to the adoptive family of the lion, the Red 13.
Yes, I remember.
And its adoptive family, like there is this old sort of wise person in the village there, and he was studying the stars and studying also these sort of things. He was kind of the learned man, the wise, and then he gets into the airship, and he's like, I forgot how good it was to something on those lines, how good it was to be in something man-made.
Right.
Because it's like I studied nature and the stars and the planet and movements of the planets and nature, but this is and he says something like, this is a testament of man's ingenuity. So
right,
I like that part.
Yeah.
Like that part of the game. I think it's a very it's a true statement. So.
That's so cool you brought that up. Final Fantasy VII was one of my childhood loves. It was one of my favorite games, and it was because of the esoteric knowledge in it. I didn't know what I was looking at when I was younger, but I understood some of the basic concepts in that. And as I grew older and started studying the mysteries and I started correlating it to that game, I was just blown away by all the esotericism in it. Not only the political, the exoteric knowledge of the political war that's going on between the crony capitalistic, Shinra and the freedom fighters. What were they called? Avalanche. Yeah. Avalanche. And I even wrote something on it many years ago, correlating it to the Kabbalah, obviously, because there's a lot of Kabbalistic stuff in it. But it's such a great message, and you don't see many games like that anymore. I mean, you see a couple, obviously, but nothing that profound. And I really like that you brought that up, because I probably wouldn't have remembered that unless you brought that up. But I love that old guy who was studying cosmology. And, when I got to that part in the game, it blew me away. I was just like, oh, my God, this is so amazing. And what you said there relates to what we're talking about. Human ingenuity is not to be demonized. It's just that since we're living in a system of slavery, human ingenuity has a higher potential of creating issues within society. It has a higher potential of creating more damage than it should be creating, because it's out of harmony. So we have to keep it within a moral boundary. We have to keep it within moral boundaries. And since most people who are the creators in the world are moral relativists, they tend to break those moral boundaries, and we end up with very, very horrific things in our society. But yeah, I think that's a great example of human ingenuity, you know, being able to fly in the ship. And that's what happens to us, right? We end up studying the occult so much, we end up being in nature so much, so separate from the creative aspects of what humans have done, and then we come back and we're just blown away by what we've done, you know. Like imagine just living in the woods in a, you know, stick hut or whatever it might be for 10 years, and then you come back and 10 years, like, let's just say from 2000 or 2010 to 2020, right? How much has changed between that decade? And you come back and you're just like, oh my God, what is this? You know, how do I deal with this stuff that's going on? It's insane. But that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, which is human ingenuity will never stop. It just has to be in balance. You know, balance is the key word. And that's what we're talking about here today. Balance between, again, anarchism and occultism, right? Balance between the aspects of freedom and the aspects of the mystery schools and mystery traditions.
Yeah, it's kind of what you know, it doesn't just concern this, it concerns also other aspects of human life. But, you know, this is something that was brought, you know, I heard it the first time from my friend Ivan in Phoenix. And he was talking about, you know, mentioning you know, freedom and wisdom, you know, free dominion and wise dominion. So you want to have the, you know, the free agency, the ability. You can, you know, you have the capacity to do what you want. Granted you're not, you know, harming, you know, violating other people's rights, but at the same time you wanna strive to have wisdom, so to live wisely and, you know, basically to have wisdom and to do the right, make the right choices at the best of your abilities. So.
Right. Yeah, we're not asking for people to be perfect, obviously, or puritanical, right? I mean, I've seen puritanicalism, which is like, you know, don't even step on a grain of grass because it's killing the grass, you know, like if you, you know, and it's like, it's an impossibility. I mean, if you as an individual want to do that, well, you know, that's your choice. You're not hurting anybody. That's fine. You can do that. But trying to force other people to be that way and you know, criticizing them or ad hominemly attacking them because they happen to be using the earth to walk around with their feet, which is their natural right to do. That's not a healthy way to build any kind of society off of, you know. Everybody would literally be in bubbles. You know, you'd have to be Bubble Boy. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but Bubble Boy, you know, trapped in the bubble.
No, but I've seen the people in bubbles in the last 2 years. So
right, it's true. Yeah.
That leads to that. Actually, you know, that attitude leads to, you know, can lead to mental, you know, having, you know, mental issues. You know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Stress.
not a wise. You know, going back to that, it's not a wise way of living, and you're not gonna enjoy your freedom, you know, your rightful, you know, freedom, because you've made unwise, you know, life choices. You have you know, all these fixations and, you know, and in the end psychological issues. So.
Right. Yeah, I would consider that to be a psychological issue for sure. You're so stressed out about every little thing that you do, and you're in fear. You know, you're not coming from a true place of love. And that's what anarchism and the occult should be striving and thriving for, is to be, you know, in harmony with the higher aspects of love, you know, to understand that if one is suffering, another is suffering, and to understand that none of us have the right to infringe upon anybody else's will as long as they are not harming anybody. You know, if they're initiating harm, then yes, we're going to have to take actions. This was something I was thinking about before I came on the show, actually, was, you know, a lot of people use karma, which is can be synonymous with natural law. Obviously, that's another word for natural law. And even dharma applies to natural law as well. But a lot of people use karma specifically as an escape idea. to escape from personal responsibility for things. And I've heard this so much, especially with females. They'll be like, oh, don't worry, karma will get them back eventually. It's like this vindictive way of just saying, don't worry, you're going to be harmed in the future for you stealing from this person. So I don't got to do anything about it, you know? So don't worry about government, because don't worry, karma's going to, you know, get the government eventually, right? Get all the people who are running government. So if you take that to an extreme, you can see how big of an issue it is, because let's say somebody breaks in your house and you're just like, well, whatever, don't worry about what he's doing at that point. Karma will take care of that in the future. It just makes you extremely passive. And that's not what it was originally trying to teach you. It wasn't trying to teach you to be passive. You know, it's trying to teach you about consequences, right? The consequences of the behavior and how it affects all of us. So even for the thief, there are negative consequences for him as that multiplies in a society. So let's say you have one person stealing from another person in a house. Well, okay, he might not have direct consequences onto him immediately. But then let's say you have a whole block, and let's say there's 10 houses, and you got 7 out of those 10 houses that are thieves, you know, the people who live in those houses, and they all start stealing from each other, you know. Well, yeah, then all the thieves are going to be, you know, experiencing negative consequences from, you know, them being thieves, you know. So it's going to build up and multiply in society, and it's going to affect each other. So as we multiply that in society at the aggregate, the consequences of that eventually do come back onto the people who are causing harm, you know, because it's like, okay, one person stealing from another person, yeah, there will be a time and space before some take place naturally for that being. But if you have 10 people, 7 people out of 10 people doing it, they're all going to be stealing from each other at some point. You know, 7 out of 10 people will be stealing from each other. So the thief is going to be stolen from by another thief. So he's going to experience that eventually. And that's how slavery works, you know. That's how it works with natural law. It's in the aggregate, you know. Yes, it builds up in the aggregate.
Yeah, people focus too much on like, you know, individual cases.
Right.
You know, like extremely, you know, sort of, you know, really the individual experience, when they have to realize that they really have to step back and watch it from an aggregate perspective. That's really
right.
The more important aspect of the law of cause and effect and consequentialism.
You know, if anybody's really interested in understanding these things more, they're not only you can use the internet to just search as much as possible, but, you know, some good references, like let's say for anarchism, I definitely recommend like Benjamin Tucker, Lysander Spooner, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's an interesting person as well. And then Josiah Warren is a really interesting anarchist, and any of the non-federal founders, the people that were standing against the federal institutions, but obviously had to compromise. So, you know, Sam Adams would be one that I would really think of as my favorite. You know, Sam Adams was great. And as far as occultism, you know, I would recommend studying Hermeticism, you know, getting into the Hermetic principles, and the Kybalion is a good book to study that. That's going to give you a good overview of natural law and the 7 Hermetic principles. You know, and I also would say things like Thelema, like we brought up earlier, is extremely important to understand. Theosophy is another occult tradition that I think has relevance, and I believe that was founded by Helena Blavatsky. You know, and I don't believe in everything that Blavatsky brought to the table, obviously, but there's a lot of good stuff there that you need to study, that you need to understand, you know. Anything in the alchemical manuscripts, alchemical traditions is really important, and understanding what alchemy really is crucial, because a lot of people just think it's about, you know, chemistry, which it does have to do with chemistry, but it's a transmutation of consciousness, obviously.
That's the story in order to be able to, you know, not to be persecuted. Probably.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it. So, you know, Kabbalah is another good tradition, and tarot. So those are some of the base ones. Those are the ones that I mainly study. There's a lot of other ones that I study, but those were the ones that really helped me in my life. And the pinnacle of all of them would be understanding the Freemasonic traditions. The Freemasonic traditions is extremely important, and we need to get out of this idea that Freemasonry is just Satanism and dark Luciferianism.
Oh yeah,
and
that's a big one.
Yeah. And
Lucifer worship,
yeah. And if you actually read their books, read Church Ward. There's so many great Freemasons out there that you can read. But Albert Pike is another good one that you could read. Albert Pike has some really interesting knowledge, and a lot of people will be like, oh, he was part of the KKK. But when I looked into him, I had that prejudice as well. I had that preconceived notion that he was part of KKK, and he obviously was not, based on the history that I understood and based on his own writings. And I think that was just something that was correlated to him on circumstantial evidence that was never really true, at least from my research. So there's a lot of stuff, but Freemasonry, that's what we're really all talking about here. Anarchism is just a form of Freemasonry, if I may say so. It's just another form of being able to, free and build freely in this world, to be creators of freedom, and to have the ability to have no authoritarian, arbitrary restrictions on our ability to build free, to build societies, to build relationships, to build our own minds, to control ourselves, to be sovereign individuals, obviously. So those are the things I would recommend for any student who's, trying to get involved in these things. And like we talked about, merge them together, bring them together, Yeah.
I actually have a couple of things I wanted to discuss before we close. So one thing, and it's one thing that I actually, I've talked about this a lot, pretty much most of my work, and I think there is in certain occult, I guess certain occult circles or student circles of students of occultism, and maybe even in anarchism somehow. There is the idea that something I've seen and heard, this idea that anarchy is actually an internal state. It's an internal state of being. I've seen this thing that, like, you have to be an anarchist you really have to be an anarchist on the inside, which I disagree with. Because I think it's quite the opposite, actually. So I was curious to hear your take on it.
Oh yeah.
People I think already know my take on it.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting concept, and I first heard this dilemma coming from Mark Passio, obviously, and I had never heard it explained the way that he explained it. And when he did explain it, I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. So if we take the word anarchy, and it just means the absence of rulers, right? And then you're saying, well, I want that to be an internal manifestation only. I need to be an internal anarchist only. And it's like, well, no, that's not what you want, because you're not ruling yourself, and you should be your own self-ruler. There is legitimate rulership of your body and your mind and your emotions and your expressions here as a conscious being, and that's your responsibility. It's like an alleviation or an abdication of responsibility to govern yourself, and there is a legitimate form of governing yourself. So the idea that you don't govern yourself, it makes you vulnerable to predators. It makes you vulnerable to abusive, relationships, or abuse relationships with tyrants, or any type of authority figure, right?
External control and domination.
Right. So you're just going to be completely plowed over with external control and domination, like you're saying. So what I always say, and what Mark talked about, is you want internal monarchy. You want to be the one ruler of yourself, and that's it, and then you want external anarchy. But I understand why people say you want internal anarchy, because originally I thought of it as, oh yeah, I don't want to believe that I can rule another being, so internally I have to start there. But that's not what we're trying to put context on. We're trying to put context on, do you want to have a state of internal anarchy? Not that you acknowledge that there should be no rulership over another being, it's that you want to acknowledge that you rule yourself and that you're in a state of internal monarchy instead. You're in the state of complete control over your own thoughts and responsibility, like I said. So we don't want external monarchy. We don't want external oligarchy, anything like that, because it's all based in slavery. So yeah, I think that's a critical point for people to understand. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. I didn't say anything myself. I mean, just from the name of my website, people will kind of know where I stand on that, since it's internal monarchy. So
right.
And yeah, so no, but yeah, obviously I agree. Yeah, you want that true sovereignty. You have to be, for true sovereignty to happen, you have to be in charge of yourself. So you need to govern yourself, and that will lead to a state of external anarchy.
Right, that's right.
External freedom and liberty. So,
well, it ties in too with this idea of no property rights. This idea that there's no such thing as property, and I think that's one of the fundamental issues within liberty movements, is that especially these communists, they're not even truly liberty movements, but the communist and socialist movements, is that there's no such thing as property at all. We see that in some anarchist writers, but it's usually taken out of context in the writings, and it's perceived as this idea that there is no rightful property in existence, that you cannot rightfully own something ever, and that includes yourself. That includes your own mind, which is your property. I mean, think about the word property, right? Whenever we look at, let's say, a plant, and we say, this plant has certain properties to it, right? It has certain aspects which are properties to it. It has the property of this color, or this, certain, atomic makeup, or, whatever these properties are that we characterize the plant with, right? It happens to grow this way. There's all these little characterizations, these categorizations that we put the plant into, and it has properties to it, right? Well, it's not a coincidence that we use that the same way in conjunction with the way that we use property as well, because my mind, my thoughts and my emotions are the properties of my consciousness. They're properties, but they're also the property of my consciousness as well. That's my property, and so is my body. It was created from a higher source. It was created through a cymatic, frequency, or is created through consciousness itself, a capital C consciousness. So it's really interesting that people actually think that they don't own their own body, because that's how far they will take it, that they do not own their own body, that their body is not theirs. And it also ties in with this weird new age thing where they're separatists, where they're like, my body is just a vessel. And at some aspects and at some level, it kind of is. But that's a really dark point of view to take on your own personal physical manifestation. And it completely separates spirit and matter, as if they're two, like matter is completely unimportant and spirit is the all important thing. And that's a very fundamental issue within the New Age movements, is that we demonize the material world. Obviously, the idea is that you don't want to become attached to the material world. You don't want to become egoly identified with the material world, but it has a purpose and a value, and it's not evil.
Yes.
It's very important, because that's where you're experiencing everything right now, in the present moment of now. It's weird because they contradict themselves. They're like, I'm in the present moment of now, but the material is unimportant. And it's like, well, while you're in the present moment of now, you're experiencing a material and spiritual existence simultaneously, so you have to deal with that concept. So when people say it's just a vessel, it's the same thing as saying my body is unimportant. You know, it's the same thing as saying that it doesn't matter what happens to my body because I'm not my body. Well, I believe every aspect of my body, not even believe, I know this, every cell in my body was created from my consciousness. You know, it has a resonant frequency from my consciousness that govern it. And every little cell is a part of me. Every little molecule is a part of me. Every little aspect of that is a part of me, you know, and that is my body. And it's a physical manifestation of my divine existence, you can say, my spiritual existence. And to just completely say, this is why the Native Americans had it right. They understood the body was to be cherished, and it's a sacred temple. It's a sacred temple, you know, and we don't have that anymore. To say it's just a space suit or a meat suit, it's disingenuous. It makes you just think so negatively on your own existence, you know. So I can't stand that. I always get into it with people about that, you know. So
we are here for a reason. So, you know,
yes,
living this current life for a reason, for a purpose. So,
right.
Of course, it matters. So,
yes, the statement, you know, it matters is a pun as well, because matter does matter, right? And then if you look at the word matter in green language, which I just did an amazing presentation on this, matter is Ma, which is the Egyptian goddess of truth and justice and natural law, and then Tyr, which is terrain, which is where it comes from. So, you know, a realm or a place, a location. So, you know, it's Ma's terrain. It's the one great architect's domain, you know, where it exists and operates in and has experiences through these fractal, you know, expressions of itself.
What happens here matters, right? Like the one of the Egyptian tenets, if I'm not correctly. Yeah. So.
Yes, it does matter.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, great point about property also. And well, I think I have a question that, you know, people might ask, because they might say, okay, so, you know, I guess anarchists might say, okay, so after all, you know, after we've said all this, you know, and all this stuff, but I mean, is it really, you know, once we know that we don't have to violate other people's rights, isn't that kind of enough? Do we really have to go through all this? Is it really necessary to go through all this knowledge, getting all this information about doing all these studies about you know, occultism or whatever, if it all comes down to, you know, not hurting, not violating others?
Right, that's a good question. It's a very interesting question. I've ran into it a couple times. You know, I've ran into it in myself as well. You know, like, you know, why is the mystery tradition so important when it comes to freedom? And if I just know natural law, isn't that enough to get me by in society? Well, kind of like what I stated earlier, it's the foundation. It's your first thing that you got to get right, you know. But to say that that's going to bring about and the aggregate freedom is to neglect how sophisticated the system actually is set up. That's the first thing I would say, is that, you know, the system itself has a foundation of dogmatic philosophy. And these dogmatic philosophies are antithetical to the mystery traditions, because the mystery traditions completely dismantle all these, you know, what I would call false religious ideologies. And without, you know, the comparative research into the mystery traditions, you can never deal with all the quackademia, you could say, the false scholarship in these areas of history, of religion. So you have to have a firm grip over these things, because you're going to have to contend with them. You're going to have to contend with the theologists in Christianity. You're going to have to contend with the scholars in the science fields. You know, you're going to have to contend with the scientists. You're going to have to contend with a lot of this stuff. So you got to find your niche. You got to find that. But also another thing is that it connects us to origins, our true origins, and our heritage, and that's really important to understand. not only is it important to get in contact with your heritage, through whatever spiritual means and intellectual means you can, but also it allows you to understand the way the ideas unfold throughout history, and it allows you to prevent those ideas from manifesting again. So without understanding the why and how they came about and how we responded to them throughout history, then you're not going to be able to deal with them in the future if they happen to arise again. We have to have contingencies for that. We have to have the ability. We can't just say, okay, we understand natural law, so now we don't have to deal with any of the theosophy or any of the historical issues within our society. We don't have to deal with origins or anything like that. That's all unimportant. Well, the foundation of the idea of authority is based in those concepts. It's based in the idea of like the divine right of king, for example. And if you don't understand the idea of the divine right of king and the hero mythos and how far it goes back and all that, then you're not really going to have a grip or an understanding of how to really apply solutions to that. How to really approach that in the modern world. And it's only in the past 100 years that we really have been able to deal with these things because of our ability to communicate and have access to this information. So we really have a lot of work cut out for us to deal with a lot of the corrupted history, because obviously the history is written by the victors usually, and we never ever see the other side of the history when it comes to the victims of those things. Usually that's what is it? It's obliterated, it's completely burned, right? Or it's just suppressed or assimilated and then propagandized at some level. So it's sophisticated.
It usually is because, people say, I think one of the fallacies that people, encounter, it's that it's all a lie, like, everything.
Right.
So, when I think, as a matter of fact, I think it's what you were saying. There the assimilation and distortion to serve a certain agenda.
Right. So, yeah. I could never stand that statement. It's all a lie. All of history is a lie, and it's just an excuse for people to not study history. And I get it. History is like, and I get it. History isn't very fun to study at first, But if you really get a passion for it and you're really interested in it, then it becomes a very, fun topic to get into. But it's not only about fun; it's also about a purpose. It's about a goal. It means that you have a purpose to actually understand these things and reconcile the fundamental ideas that have, plagued the minds of great men and lesser men throughout all of history. And that's one of the things that I would say. And then the other thing about understanding the mystery traditions is that it's going to get you back in touch with a spiritual prospect. And I think that's really important to understand, is that you have to take it back to the spiritual prospect at some level. And the ancient rituals and rites and the profound way of storing it allegorically in the mythology and the symbolism and sign language is important to reconnect you to yourself and to source. So it gets you back in tune with source. And I don't think that we could live in harmony with nature without understanding those things. I don't think we could build a society based upon truth without understanding the truth of history or the truth of our spiritual nature. And to understand those things, we're going to have to go to the minds that worked effortlessly worked on this for hundreds of thousands of years, and they've done it far better than we've done in the modern time.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think that the important part about studying, getting into this course of study is it's really about understanding the importance of truth, and why the ancient civilization, starting with Egypt, had understood why truth was important.
Right.
In my opinion, and also the methods of preserving and bringing truth forward into the future for future generations. So, that's what I would say about the last point the last question I made.
Yeah, you simplified it better than me. So that's good. That's really good. That's better for the initiates. It's like, yeah, it's just about truth. You want to know truth? This is what you got to study. Get with
and
it.
And why it is important, and why it is not just something that, you know, either doesn't exist or even if it exists, it's not really, you know, who cares in the end. But,
right.
So yeah, that's the reason, my opinion. Okay, I think I think we are good for today. It was a great discussion. Really enjoyed it. Was very interesting, and again, I'm glad to have had you on for this episode. So thanks again.
Well, thank you very much, Francisco. Yeah, it's been a really great discussion. If anybody's interested in checking out my work, you can go to seedtruth.com, where you can find some of my work. And then you can also find it at the onegreatworknetwork.com. You can go to the content page, and I'm right there at the top, Brandon Martin. And then also you can check out the podcast with me and Nate Cap and Douglas Martin, which is Cubbyhole, CUBBYWHOLE.com. And there's a lot of great work there for all levels of anybody, all levels of consciousness, all levels of starting, you know. So there's stuff for everybody there. So yeah, thank you for having me on, and I look forward to another discussion with you in the future, Francisco.
Oh yeah, me too, definitely. Hey, have you mentioned your personal website? I don't remember.
Yeah, seedtruth.
Okay, seedtruth.com.
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, then it's all for today, and until next time.